The morning I came home from my sister's funeral, I found a woman I'd never seen before sitting at my kitchen table, wearing my robe. Not a similar robe. My robe. The one my husband had given me for our 31st anniversary. Pale, blue terry cloth with my initials monogrammed on the left breast pocket. LMH. Loretta May Hutchins. Except I hadn't been Hutchins for 31 years. I'd been Loretta May Calloway, and that robe had been hanging on the back of our bathroom door when I left for Savannah 5 days ago. She looked up at me with her coffee mug halfway to her lips and didn't say a word. I set my suitcase down on the hardwood floor. I heard it click. I remember that sound very clearly. Everything else in that moment felt like it was happening underwater. My husband came out of the hallway. He was dressed, at least, freshly shaved. He looked at me the way you look at something you forgot to cancel. "Loretta," he said, like my name was the start of an explanation. I looked at her. I looked at him. I looked at the coffee mug, my mug, the ceramic one my daughter had painted for me at one of those pottery places when she was 9, the one with the lopsided sunflower and mom written in purple glaze. "How long?" I said. He didn't answer fast enough. "How long, Gerald?" He said 14 months. He said it quietly, like the number being small made it better. 14 months? My sister had been sick for 18. I had driven back and forth to Savannah 11 times in the last year and a half, and for 14 of those months, this had been happening in my own house. I did not scream. I want you to know that. I have always been the kind of woman who does not scream. My mother raised me that way. You feel what you feel, but you don't perform it for strangers. I picked up my suitcase. I walked back to the front door. I said, "You have until I get back from the end of the driveway to get her out of this house." Then I walked to the end of the driveway, and I stood there in the November cold in my funeral clothes, and I counted to 120. When I came back inside, she was gone. Gerald was sitting at the kitchen table where she had been. He had his hands folded in front of him like a man waiting for a verdict, which I suppose he was. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat across from him, and we talked for 4 hours. By the end of it, I understood that the marriage was over. I think I had understood that in the driveway. But Gerald wanted the house. He said his name was on the deed. He said I had my sister's place in Savannah now. He said he thought this was the cleanest solution. I was 63 years old. I had a master's degree in library science. I had worked at the Hargrove County Public Library for 22 years before I retired to help care for my sister. I had raised our son, managed our household, handled our taxes, organized every vacation we had ever taken, and remembered every birthday of every person in Gerald's family for 31 years. And he was offering me a clean solution. I left 2 days later with my car, my clothes, a box of books, and the wooden jewelry box my father had left me when he died. It was small. It fit in the back seat easily. I didn't fight for anything else because I was too tired, and because part of me believed on some level that I didn't deserve to fight. That's what 31 years with someone can do to you, even someone who turns out to be not quite who you thought. I drove to Savannah. My sister's house was small. A pale yellow craftsman bungalow on a street full of live oaks. She had never married. She had lived alone and kept a garden and worked as a bookkeeper until her body made that impossible. The house smelled like her, lavender and old paper, and something faintly sweet that I could never quite identify. I sat on her porch that first night, and I did not know what to do next. I had $4,300 in my personal checking account. My Social Security wouldn't start for another 2 years. The library pension was modest. Gerald and I had joint retirement savings, but accessing those was going to require lawyers and time and energy I didn't have yet. I slept in my sister's bed because I couldn't bring myself to change the sheets. I ate crackers and peanut butter for dinner. I was 63 years old, and I felt, for the first time in my adult life, completely untethered. The wooden jewelry box sat on the dresser. My father had given it to me the year before he died, which was 1987. He said, "There are some things in here that might matter someday." He said it in that way he had, like he was being careful with words, like each one cost something. My father was not a man who wasted anything. I had opened it once, back then. There were some old papers, a pocket watch that didn't work, a photograph of him as a young man standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, and a small envelope with my name on it. The envelope had contained a handwritten note and a business card. The note said, "Loretta, if you ever need this, use it. Tell them whose daughter you are. Dad." The business card was for a man named Mr. E. Beaumont at an address in Nashville. It said Beaumont and Associates, Music Publishing and Rights Management. I didn't know what that meant in 1987, and I didn't know why my father would have a connection to anyone in music publishing. My father had been a high school history teacher in Macon, Georgia. I put the note and the business card back in the envelope, put the envelope back in the box, and didn't think about it again for 36 years. That third morning in Savannah, I opened the box again. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I was looking for something of his presence somehow. He had been gone so long, and I was grieving everything at once. My sister, my marriage, the version of my life I thought I had been living, and I needed something solid to hold on to. I read the note again. "If you ever need this, use it." I sat on the edge of my sister's bed and I thought, well, I need something right now, Daddy. I surely do. I looked at Beaumont and Associates on my phone. The firm still existed. It wasn't in Nashville anymore. It had moved to Atlanta, and the original Mr. Beaumont had been succeeded by a son and then a partner, and now it operated under a slightly different name. But it was there. It was real. I called the main number. A receptionist answered. I said I was calling because my father had had a business relationship with the original Edward Beaumont, and I wanted to understand what, if anything, might still be relevant to his estate. I said my father's name, Harold James Whitmore. There was a pause. Then she said, "Will you hold, please?" I held for 4 minutes. I counted. A man came on the line. He introduced himself as the firm's senior managing partner. His voice was careful, professional. He said, "Ms. Whitmore, I need to ask you a few questions to verify your identity. Would you be willing to come into our Atlanta office?" I said I was in Savannah. He said they would cover travel. I drove to Atlanta 3 days later in my 11-year-old Camry with my father's business card in my coat pocket. The office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. I had dressed carefully, my good gray blazer, the pearl earrings my sister had left me. I felt very aware of being 63 and a little out of place, and I kept my hands very still in my lap in the elevator so they wouldn't see me tremble. They had a conference room waiting. There were 2 people across the table, the managing partner and a younger woman who was introduced as the firm's rights analyst. They verified my identity with my driver's license, my father's death certificate, my own birth certificate, and a copy of his will. These were all things I happened to have because I was a librarian for 22 years and I keep documents. Then the managing partner set a folder on the table and he looked at me and he said, "Ms. Whitmore, your father came to us in 1974. He was, as I'm sure you know, an exceptional songwriter." I said, "I'm sorry." He said it again. My father taught history. He coached junior varsity baseball. He made very good cornbread. He played harmonica sometimes on Sunday evenings, sitting on the back steps. I had not known him as a songwriter. The managing partner explained it to me in measured, careful sentences while I sat very still and tried to understand. My father had written songs under a pen name. He had chosen his mother's maiden name, Hartley, as a professional identity. James Hartley. He had written primarily in the gospel and Southern soul tradition, beginning in the late 1960s and continuing through the early 1980s. He had worked with several small labels and a handful of artists who later became significantly more well-known. He had quietly registered the rights to everything he wrote through Beaumont and Associates, who had managed his catalog for 50 years. He had never told my mother, he had never told my sister, he had told no one, as far as the firm knew, except that he had left me that business card. The rights analyst slid a document across the table. It was a summary of the catalog, how many compositions, current licensing status, recent royalty activity. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. I looked at it for a long time. Then I said, "Is this per year?" She said, "That's the annual royalty income for the last fiscal year." The catalog value itself is considerably higher. Several of his compositions have had significant renewed interest in recent years due to placements in film and streaming. I set the paper down on the table very carefully. My father's songs were in movies. They were in television shows. They were on streaming platforms where people listened to them while they drove to work, while they cooked dinner, while they sat on their porches on November evenings not knowing what to do next. He had been doing all of this quietly for 50 years, teaching history during the week and writing something that would outlast him by decades. And he had left it to me, just me, not because he loved my sister less. I know that isn't why, but because there had been something between my father and me, some particular frequency we were on together, and I think he knew, somehow, that I was the one who would need it most. I cried in that conference room. I'm not ashamed of that. The managing partner pushed a box of tissues across the table with the practiced grace of someone who has delivered this kind of news before, and I took one and I pressed it against my eyes and I let myself feel it for a minute. Then I asked what I needed to do. The next several months were not simple. There was the legal process of formally claiming the inheritance, which required establishing my status as sole heir under my father's original estate documents. There was a conversation with a music rights attorney who was kind and thorough and charged me a consultation fee I paid for my last credit card. There was paperwork, so much paperwork. And there was, running alongside all of it, the matter of Gerald and the house. My son, he's 40 years old now, lives in Denver, works in environmental engineering. He called me when I told him what was happening. Both parts, the divorce and the inheritance. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "Mom, did you know about any of this?" I said, "Sweetheart, I am finding out everything exactly when you are." He offered to come to Savannah. I told him to stay where he was. I told him I was okay, which was not entirely true, but was becoming more true as the weeks went on. Gerald's attorney sent letters. Gerald wanted to negotiate the retirement accounts. Gerald wanted to discuss the timeline of my access to marital assets. Gerald's attorney used the word equitable in every single letter in a way that I began to find almost funny. My attorney, a woman in Savannah who had handled my sister's estate and who wore bright red glasses and had the efficient energy of someone who had seen every variation of human foolishness. She read the letters and she said, "He doesn't know about the catalog yet." I said, "No." She looked at me over those red glasses. "You understand that changes things considerably." I said, "I know." She said, "He's going to find out during discovery." I said, "That's fine." She smiled. It was a small smile, professional. "All right then. I want to be clear about something. I did not pursue that divorce with malice. I had been married to Gerald for 31 years. I had loved him. Parts of me probably still did. In the complicated way you love someone who has become so much a part of your daily life that you can't fully separate the person from the furniture and the habit. But I was 63 years old, and I was not going to let exhaustion be mistaken for acceptance. The catalog generated enough annual income that I could live, actually live, not just survive, without touching any of the marital assets. My attorney advised me to make clear, when it came to settlement discussions, that I had independent means and was fully prepared to wait as long as necessary. Gerald's attorney called mine and asked for a meeting. We settled in March. I kept a retirement savings I was entitled to. Gerald kept the house. I kept everything else. I stayed in my sister's bungalow. I planted her garden in the spring because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I learned that she had labeled everything in the garden shed with masking tape and a black marker, each trowel, each pair of gloves, each paper bag of bulbs. It was so completely her that I had to sit down on an overturned bucket and breathe for a while. My father's songs kept finding new audiences. One of his compositions, a slow gospel piece he'd written in 1971, was licensed for a scene in the documentary that got significant attention. The catalog manager sent me a note about the royalty increase. It was not the kind of money that changes the meaning of the word money, but it was the kind of money that changes the meaning of the word free. I started volunteering at the Savannah Branch Library twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The head librarian asked if I had any interest in running a community reading program for seniors, and I said yes before she finished the sentence. I called my son every Sunday. He came down for Christmas and we cooked in my sister's kitchen and watched old movies, and I showed him the folder from the Atlanta meeting. He held it for a long time. He never said anything, my son said, not once. No, I said. My son looked up at me. He has his grandfather's eyes. I hadn't noticed that in years. Why do you think he left it to you? I had thought about this many times. Because he knew I'd use it carefully, I said, and because he knew there would be a moment when I'd need it most, and he wanted to be there for that moment, even if he couldn't be. We sat with that for a while. My father played harmonica on Sunday evenings. He sat on the back steps of our house in Macon and played, and I used to sit beside him and listen, and neither of us talked much. I thought it was just something he did to unwind. I didn't know it was part of something larger. I didn't know he was building something that would carry long after the Sunday evenings were gone. That's the thing about the people who love you quietly. You don't always know what they've left you until you need it. I am 64 now. I wake up in my sister's house, which I have come to think of as my house, and I make coffee and sit on the porch in the mornings and listen to the live oaks do what live oaks do. Some days I am sad. Some days I miss things I am not sure I should miss. Some days I drive past something that reminds me of 31 years and I feel it like a bruise that's mostly healed but not entirely. But here's what I know. I came home from my sister's funeral and found a woman in my robe at my kitchen table. And I stood at the end of my driveway in the November cold and I counted to 120. And I walked back inside. And eventually, not that day, not for months, I found my way to a conference room in Atlanta with a business card my father had given me 36 years before. And that business card turned out to be the thing that let me keep going. He knew. He always knew. He just waited until I was ready to find it. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. And if you've ever found something from someone you lost, something you didn't understand until the moment you needed it, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I think about my father a lot these days, not the version of him I constructed in grief, the perfect, saintly father, but the real one. The man who graded papers at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, who burned toast every single morning without fail, who sat on the back steps with his harmonica and played songs I never thought to ask about. He was an ordinary man living an ordinary life. And underneath all of it, quietly, he was building something that would matter long after he was gone. What strikes me now is not the money. It's the character it took to do what he did. He could have kept that catalog for himself. He could have let the rights lapse, let the whole thing dissolve into nothing when he died. Instead, he registered everything carefully, maintained the relationship with the firm for decades, wrote me a note, and waited. That kind of patience, the kind that plans for someone else's future without needing credit for it, is not something you can perform. It comes from somewhere deep and true inside a person. My father had integrity, the way some people have a good singing voice. It was just in him. And Gerald. I have had to sit with Gerald too. Not with bitterness, though I won't pretend that's never visited me, but with something more honest. Gerald made choices that came from a kind of smallness, the assumption that I wouldn't know how to navigate the world without him, that offering me a clean solution was generosity rather than dismissal. He underestimated me because, somewhere along the way, I had let myself be underestimated. That's the part I have to own. I had stopped asking questions about the marriage, about my father's old papers, about what I actually wanted from the years I'd left. I had confused contentment with wisdom and stillness with strength. The jewelry box sat in my possession for 36 years. The answer was always there. I just hadn't been ready to need it yet. What I've learned, and I mean learned in the way you learn things that cost you something, is that the moments that break you open are not your enemies. They're just information. Standing at the end of my driveway in November in my funeral clothes, I didn't know that I was standing at the beginning of something. I thought I was at the end. The difference between those two things turned out to be a small wooden box and the willingness to open it. There is a particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like a 63-year-old woman driving an 11-year-old Camry to Atlanta with a business card in her coat pocket. It looks like sitting in a conference room and not falling apart when the number on the page doesn't make sense yet. It looks like planting your dead sister's garden in the spring even when you don't know what you're doing because your hands need something real to hold. I am 64 now. I am learning, slowly, that endurance is not the same as living. My father knew that. He played music and registered the rights and left me a note. And he trusted that I would find my way to it when it mattered. That trust, that belief in someone before they've earned it yet, might be the most generous thing one person can offer another. I think I'm finally becoming the woman he thought he was leaving it to.